Okay, welcome, folks, for another episode of Hanger DX podcast. And our podcast is getting popular. Now we have celebrities here. I'm very excited to have Sridhar join us from Slack. For some background, Sridhar has been one of our earliest Hanger DX community members, and he's been one of our supporters for a long time. So I'm extremely excited for this conversation. Sridhar, I'll probably not do justice, so please introduce yourself for the audience.
Okay. Um, um, I'm Sridhar Ramakrishnan, pronounce him. I lead the developer experience team at Slack. Internally, we call it DevEx for short. Before Slack, I was at Fitbit for a couple of years leading like DevXP related teams. I would say overall, like around the last 8 to 10 years, I've been in this space. I started early on as a developer, did bit of front end, back end, mobile development. And then I was like, okay, some parts are very difficult to do. Why there is a lack of tooling? That sort of got me into this space. Um, so that's my quick background. And I'm based in Bay Area. Yeah.
Awesome. So Sridhar, you've been at Slack for so long, and you've also kind of like moved from being a lead for DevEx at mobile. Now you kind of like lead all of DevEx. So maybe you can give us some perspective of what has changed and how it has like what are the core differences between DevEx for mobile versus all of DevEx?
Wow. Okay. So when I started at Slack, my main responsibility at that time was directly managing a mobile DevXP team. So Slack was growing and we had like iOS clients, Android clients, and desktop clients. Um, there were a lot of challenges early on. Things have definitely got better over the time in terms of mobile tooling. So when I started, the first thing is I got the privilege to work with really great team um, on the mobile side where we could able to take some very big bets. Um, Mobile is complicated or complex in terms of like, okay, there are certain like, mandates or requirements in terms of tooling and workflow coming from like, what Apple prefer for us to use. And similarly on the Android side, what, Google provides. Um, so I maybe just working with those restrictions, it sort of helped me to like, take bigger bets. And that's how like things that have worked very well on the mobile, maybe that helped me to get the visibility in the first place. Um, in terms of my transition from mobile to like, leading the entire Slack developer experience, that transition was very hard because it was like an increase in scope. So it's not just, few clients, it's also like front end, back end services. There is like, other horizontal teams. So the scope were a lot more. There was more responsibility, uh, different technical problems. Like the tech stack itself is different. Like I got to know about the latest and greatest about what's happening on front end and back end. Um, so I need to make a lot of like day to day changes, I would say, like rethink my priorities, like focused heavily on hiring, both on the IC side and on the management side, um, structuring the teams to better align with what is the customer base in terms of like, again, front end, back end. Like every company has a different ratio of these customer based on the product offering. Um, Problems which looked really big on the mobile side ended up becoming very small. uh, it's like, it's people say, okay, you have a problem. When you look into a bigger problem, it looks very small. Like I could able to like experience that part.
Interesting.
Even though there were these challenges, I think the fundamentals I could able to apply. from mobile to any other platform. It's like make sure you know your customers, get feedback from the customers, do surveys, like, try to see what are the challenges they are having and how we can build solutions for those use cases. Those are all repeatable, and like that's something I could able to leverage from my mobile side to the other areas.
Very cool. I do have a lot of questions around DevEx, and the core of this conversation, I would love to dive into AI. But I think one question that I'm sure a lot of audience would want to know is how does Slack internally uses Slack, and kind of like more from the perspective of developer experience, thinking about like notifications, flow state, all of those things. So share a little bit about like how does Slack internally use Slack?
We try to do as much as possible within Slack. So I would say definitely Slack uses Slack very differently from other companies, at least based on my experience. Like I've used Slack before. When I started Slack and the way they were getting used, it took a while for me to onboard. I felt like it was a very different experience. So it's like, and also it's good to observe like how the customer base, like primary customers being developed, how they use Slack and how they use other tools. So, they use an IDE and then they use Slack for collaboration. There are certain things you get feedback from your IDE or command line, certain things you are dependent on, like, code reviews, for example. You're waiting for someone. And so a lot of the tools, anytime we think about the problem, is like, okay, where does the solution should land in? Is that should be on the, Slack side, or it should be something like where the developer actually does the work, whether it's on the IDE or, CLI or anywhere else. So we do have a lot of bots, um, like, bots to remind people about, like, whether it's reviews or like, there are channels for everything we do, from like, if you want to see where we are in terms of deployment for any of the service, we can go and look into a Slack channel. When we think about automating any of these process from, deployment to anything else, it's like the integration within Slack definitely comes in place. So it's like, oh, should we, like the usual interesting debates are like, oh, should we just add to the existing bot? Do we need to create a new bot? Like how that experience is going to work. So we do different things on the tooling side, but you also ask about like, like how maybe like everybody uses Slack differently. I'm not sure whether the way I use is the best way. Some people prefer to like, snooze notification, they put focus time so that they are in the flow. That's something we encourage like all the developers and individual contributors to do. I personally don't do that. As a leader of leaders, if someone is blocked and they want to escalate, like that's one thing, because when we see someone has turned off notification or set the status to away, we are very mindful about it. We don't want to disturb them because there's a reason they have done that. So personally, I don't do it unless it's like, okay, I need a specific focus time. I'm doing something and I need to turn off everything. Then, like, I turn off. When we go on vacation, we even say, like, you know what, delete the app, don't install. Um, it also helps to find out other dog food issues when we do something like that. And that helps, like, to completely, like, focus away from work, recharge, and come back.
Very okay. So let's move to AI because I think that's like an interesting area I want to cover. I've talked to you a lot about many of these areas. So when people think about AI and especially in developer experience, the most obvious and common thing that comes to mind is coding assistance. I would love to hear outside of coding assistance, what's your focus area or thought process or opinions are where AI can make a big difference?
Um, this is something we learned over the past is like whether it's a new technology or a problem space, we directly jump into the solution and then we will worry how to scale this and what's the infra behind it. So like this time we were like, okay, let's take a different approach here. So our first step in investment was to like how we can provide a secure, compliant, scalable infrastructure where people can build tools and experience on the AI side. So think of a simple API, which is like an internal API. Anybody can use that API for different use cases. So building an infra team around AI was like the main focus. And the next thing is instead of looking for a new problems to solve, we were like, okay, what are the existing problems we have? We know that from developer surveys and pain point, and how AI can help in these spaces. So that's the approach we took. Again, everything is from like the developer's perspective, like where they are finding it difficult. Um, some examples I can give are like, code migration is one area. A lot of company goes through this challenge. So we were like, okay, how would that look like if we apply AI on code migration? Um, like testing is definitely another area we are looking into, which also came as like when we did the code migration and we were like, okay, what are the next easy stuff we can leverage with? Um, we have quite a few areas we are thinking about. Pretty much like if you think any developer workflow, it's like how we can apply AI here. That's sort of the approach we are taking right now.
Very cool. So talking about like, double clicking a little bit more on code migrations and test generation, kind of like any place where you're writing code using AI. How do you think about accuracy? Like I find like this is also like one challenge. For instance, we also very actively use coding assistants and the accuracy is weirdly bad in the sense that when you read the code written by AI, it looks very accurate and it doesn't work. So and then you have to like spend more time debugging it. How have you found your experiments with AI so far?
So anytime when we started, I think it's like you said, it's the similar challenges we had. We started with something, and the first thing is like, how do we measure? This is not very specific to AI we are doing. Like any kind of problem we are trying to solve is like, okay, what are the success metric? How we are going to measure that? So when it comes to AI generated, let me give an example about the migration part. It's like, okay, we know what needs to be migrated. For example, in this context, we are trying to migrate from like Enzyme to React test library. Um, and we took the input source code, piped to the LLM AI model, and then we got response back and we manually looked into it. How does it look like? That's a quick prototype.
Hmm.
And in order to scale that for like thousands of files and test, we need to create some first step is like create a evaluation metric, like, okay, and then try to report that from the time we launch the project. It's like, okay, what should be the success metric should be? Is 70% is a good place to start, or do we need 80%? So in this example, when we started, I think we took several approach. We were using like AST for the migration process. We saw the success criteria over there. We tried with AI. We got some kind of success metric. This was done very early on, early this year. So like some of the models were not at the same level that they are right now. So I think so that's one part we can evaluate. The second thing is also keeping humans in the loop in terms of like the feedback. Like when we say, okay, this is an AI generated file, somebody needs to review that and give feedback. Like how much was it accurate, what is some of the areas it really got it wrong, so that we can improve the feedback cycle. I think this the sort of main surprise we are going through in the AI stuff I'm seeing is that the importance of iteration and experimentation is a lot more compared to a normal software development lifecycle. Um, yeah, so those are the few things, and we are trying to apply that on every other areas.
Interesting. Do you have any suggestions or kind of like more anecdotal ideas around what things improve accuracy noticeably? Like you mentioned, kind of like iterations. You kind of like do iterations and things improve. Are there like signs or signals, things you have seen, kind of like that makes accuracy significantly better, or do you think it's very case by case basis?
Um, Input data matters a lot for AI,
Okay.
right? So it's like, say for example, if you're doing something, is that code trained? Is it? That's very critical. Do you have good examples you can point to? Right. There are other use cases where, like, say for example, if you need some kind of help with document or escalation and stuff like that, like, do we have good documentation out there? I think that's very critical to it. And on top of it, it's like, okay, like, if this is what we are getting, what are the other tools we have? Like, in terms of, do we need to do fine tuning? Do we need to apply like any kind of other framework like RAG on top of it? So we've been like, when I say experimentation, it's those incremental steps that we need to take. And as we do each of that, we again evaluate, okay, is it helping or is it making worse? And then once we feel like, okay, this is the percentage, we are not trying to look for like 95 or 100% in terms of accuracy. It's like, okay, if 80 to 90% is a good range to leverage, and then we do an ROI analysis. Like, okay, if we do this, what is the ROI we are going to get from it?
Interesting. So do you think like generally like 80-90% is what many of the AI experiments typically land at? Like successful ones?
That's the bar we are setting, because we want to be very mindful, because like I don't think everybody is fully on board in terms of like leveraging and applying AI. So when we try to do something new, innovative, we want to make sure like it doesn't get a bad PR from the get-go. Um, like, it's the first impression really matters here with developers. So the extra care we put in, it definitely shows.
Got it. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about like possibly failures as well. Have there been AI experiments that you ran or like had some, thesis behind, and when you ran it through kind of like AI systems, it wasn't really very helpful?
So the projects I've talked about, like whether it's the migration, we did few migrations. One is on the testing side. We also were trying some even bigger bets like CI migration. Like, say, for example, if we have one CI tool, how can we leverage AI to migrate from one tool to another tool instead of just a framework or a language? Uh, all of this initially was a failure. Nothing was like, okay, we plugged in and then things started working right away and it was a win. It never happened like that way. Um, I would say the main failures so far are the areas where we experimented once and we stopped.
Interesting.
Like, we didn't go further into that. It's like, okay, we tried, this is how much it works. We didn't see adoption. And I think it mostly questioning, is this the right investment we need to make right now, or is there something of higher impact? So the failures were all around like things we didn't push further. Um, for different cases, whether it's like we didn't have enough data, maybe the model weren't ready at that time, or like, for example, like integrating with different frameworks or tools. For example, like I said, AST plus AI is like, that was a very innovative approach by the engineer there to try to merge two technology and see if that is going to come up. Again, that also came as an experiment.
Interesting. Actually, this AST plus AI was probably like you were the first one who mentioned this, and kind of like sounds like a very important thing when we think, especially about code generation. Um, have you? Do you think you use that concept now in many of your experiments? Do you see kind of like this will become like a common practice? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's definitely in top of our mind because we have seen the success that it has improved. I think if I remember, it was like close to like 20% improvement or something like that
Wow.
when we combined it. So it's like, again, if it makes sense for the specific use case, we'll try. Um, will it be a blanket approach? I don't know. It's really hard to say things because, there is also in parallel models are getting better very fast. So maybe we don't have to. Maybe, sometime next year, it's like even without the AST, it might work. So um, again, that's why I think it's important to
Have
experiment and see
iterative
if it
approach.
works.
Interesting. Do you think like these iterations for you are getting better in the sense like every time you pick up a new project for AI, like taking learnings from last time, do you think over time you're like have to run fewer iterations because you've already accommodated for a lot of assumptions that you had in the previous ones?
The learnings from all of this are very useful. Like, and like what has worked for this use case, and then like that's not something like anybody has to question, because like if an engineer is trying to apply, for a different problem, say for example test failure analysis or log analysis or anything like that, I think they know like what was done before by other team. The first step they take is like go and talk to that engineer, and then like, hey, and try to understand about that. And also, like as they experiment, they get mentorship and support from the team. Like, okay, is that something we should try? If we feel strongly about one way or the other, then we suggest doing that. Um, but if you think in terms of like the cycle time for all of these iteration, like in theory, it should go down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And do you have like a specific team who's doing these LLM experiments within DevEx, or is it like everyone is kind of like trying a little bit of it?
So we have a dedicated team which supports all the infra,
Okay.
which is so that nobody has to worry about like, okay, if I build something and run this on every pull request, is it going to scale? Is that going to impact cost? So the goal is anyone who's trying to experiment does not have to worry about these stuff. And then the respective teams, if like say for example, if they are in front end, they are trying to see how they can leverage for front end unit test, for example. If they are in mobile, they are trying to see how they can leverage this API. So it's like infra is common, and we want to keep it that way so that like it's very easy and faster to deal with security, compliance, and scalability aspect of it. Like we want someone to own the infrastructure. The application of that is like any of the teams can do it. We started with a couple of teams early on this year, but in order to scale at every platform, different use cases, I think like having the application distributed in different teams is what we are seeing that is going to have the most impact and faster.
Uh, Share a little bit about like, what kind of models do you folks use? Like, like, there's also Slack models, like there's Salesforce is doing a lot of stuff in AI. And obviously there's a lot of like these existing now LLM models. What's your strategy on these?
we sort of using both internal and external. We are evaluating like, okay, is this internal model is going to be better in some way for that specific use case? So we are doing both, and like the infra is set in a way that is very easy for us to swap the model if needed. Again, only if it is, approved in terms of compliance and security. So yeah, short answer is both. We are looking into both.
Very cool. And how do you think about like the cost? I can understand like hopefully the internal models are cheaper. Are there any thought processes behind like prioritization and cost associated with it for AI experiments?
Yes. When we started with the AI stuff early on this year, I think. Um, so before we did like at least looking into all the teams in DevXP, like um, AI was when we started, it was like the bottommost in terms of the cost. Within, I think, like a month or so, or maybe 2 months, it went to the number one in terms of the most expensive investment. So we we did two things in parallel. One is the DevExP AI infra team seriously looked into what are the different ways we can optimize for cost, irrespective of scale. We made an assumption that the scale is going to continue. So all the teams are going to leverage it. So if we have like a rough estimate about where we are going to land by end of this year, end of next year, so the team started looking into ways to optimize the cost, and they've done an excellent work by like reducing the cost by 90% or so.
Wow.
Um, at the same time, the scale, like the usage has been increasing. The second part is also like, like, is it the right problem to look in? Like, what is the ROI we are going to get? So that's where like we need to decide, like, is it the right bet? Should we do it right now? Or it looks interesting, maybe it is easier, but it's not going to get the most in terms of ROI measured via like developer time saved, or like, velocity improved, or any of those dev metrics. So we sort of took both the approach early on. Now we are at a stage where like, okay, now we can experiment a lot more on different use cases.
Interesting. Can you give an example of where you push back is like this is probably not worth investing into or kind of like not doing in terms of is it going to make a difference in your DevEx?
So we looked into test failures as one of the experiment.
Okay.
Like say, there are n number of builds happens every day, and there are certain percentage ends up failing due to a failure. And from a developer perspective, it's really hard. Like some of the logs are like pages long, try to find out what's the root cause of the error. So we were like, okay, how about we just pass that entire log and then see if it provides, um, you know, where the real issue is. The AI did a good job around that, but if you think about like passing multi-pages document, like the token size is pretty huge at that time. So when we did and we had constraint in terms of like the pricing and stuff, we were like, okay, this is not the time yet. So like we did experiment, got feedback from developers, but we didn't scale it further. We paused at that point.
Interesting. Okay, that's a good one. So if somebody like I know a lot of people are obviously curious about using AI, and a lot of them are also kind of like looking at opportunities where they can make a difference in DevEx as well. Do you have any advice for people who are just getting started of looking beyond the coding assistance? Uh, where else can they like? Do you have any advice or recommendations for where they should start?
Um, I would start with two things. One is like, just educating and upskilling engineers in this space. It's a new area. It does require some fundamentals on how it works, because like, it's not like, okay, this is going to solve all the problem. And even if you believe that it's going to solve all the problem, you need to understand how it works at a very high level. So I think that's a key component, because once people are aware of the basics of it, they could come up with a lot of ideas on their own. Like, even if it's not going to be a very big bet, like I can apply this in this small area and this is going to save like 2 hours every day for n number of engineers. That's still a very high impact stuff. So upskilling engineers who are in the DevXP space is the number one thing I would say. The second one is have a good strategy around infrastructure. Like, if it's a cloud provider, like whatever is your strategy, make sure you have infra in place and do the basics, foundational stuff, like making sure like how reliable the system is, can it scale, cost, having metrics, monitoring, all of this in place. And the other area I would say is like, don't stop at code assistant. Like, yes, like, there is a lot of, media and exposure around like the AI and, GitHub Copilot, like companies are adopting for it. That's great, but don't stop there, because it's like, oh, we have Copilot, then everything is like we are fully AI enabled. That's not the case. There are still a lot of areas we can definitely apply AI.
Very cool. And how do you stay up to date on all of these like things that are happening in AI world, or like related especially to DevEx? Are there kind of like, yeah, things that you read, follow, talk to?
Um, I think it's just learning from the experts in the AI side. Like, there's a lot of good research papers from like Google, Anthropic, um, and trying to learn how some papers get technical and complex. Again, leverage AI to read those papers. I've done that. So that's one thing. Second one is like, when there are examples of like, okay, here is a model and this is how it's helping with something around vision, for example. Like, at this point, we don't do a lot on vision. Like, we can eventually apply vision on like, end-to-end testing or anything UI related stuff. Yes, we can apply that. But then like learning that and trying to see like, okay, if we change that vision to a different model, can we apply this on a different use case? Sharing experience with like other companies in the DevXP space, like what is their experience, what is working. We also have different Slack workspaces. So we share like with other companies in terms of our learnings, like, okay, we tried X, it worked out. Like I said, blog post, even open sourcing, like what we have built or contributing to existing one. Um, and like I said, like the market buzz is helping a lot to get coverage. And like, and it's also bringing up a lot of newer tool stuff into mainstream media stuff. So I think all of these are helping. We just have to keep an eye out for like what is new. um, and we can also learn a lot from engineers. They are always on top of these stuff. They were like, hey, the new model released today, we want to try it out. And so that also helps. There's a lot of motivated people.
That's amazing. So I know there's a lot of things we can cover, but I would want to at least like cover a couple, like just wrap up and cover a couple of topics. So one is roadmap. So share a bit about like what's going on in DevEx world in Slack right now. What are some of the like, areas that you want to cover? I mean, especially if it comes related to AI, that will be good to learn. Like kind of any kind of experiments that you're running right now, or thinking about 2025.
Um, in terms of AI, like I said, it's like, I think the main focus right now is like how we can increase the experimentation velocity for each of the teams in DevExP. Like even if a team is focused on ops, for example, managing the infrastructure and stuff, like, okay, what are the opportunity we have over there to experiment AI? So that's a big theme there. In parallel, there are some basics of DevXP that is still going to continue. It's like, okay, what are the new metrics we should be looking? Key developer metrics. Like, is there any new metrics we should try out? Um, Things in terms of standardization. Are we using different tools solving the same problem? What can we do to standardize that? That helps with velocity. Um, Also, like sticking to some of the basics, like, okay, is your build is fast enough? Is there fundamental issues on the build tooling we have? And what is something we need to invest to improve that? Um, it'll be very interesting. Like, I'm thinking through this, it's like, okay, how can we even do something like a build tool migration and how we
Hmm.
can apply AI to it? That would be an interesting experiment to do. I think out of all of these stuff, my favorite part is, the systems and service should work. I think end of the day, that's what matters for developers is like how reliable it is and how fast and how performant it is. So like removing as much friction as possible, I think that's fundamental. And then we can do a lot of shiny things on top of it. Uh,
Nice. What do you think has been like some of the biggest improvements in DevEx that you folks have done in the last couple of years, maybe,
Last couple of years.
or anything recently?
Some of the projects are multi-quarter, some are even went through a year. So I can definitely think about deploy automation is something I think the team did an amazing job. Like, you know, the industry has been talking about continuous deployment forever. Um, and this is my first experience working in a company where that actually happened. Like,
Nice.
so and at the same time, it's not just only doing continuous deployment, but adding all other features on top of it, like how fast we can roll back. Is that automated way of rolling things back? So basically, faster iteration in the deployment side of things. Moving to Bazel as a build tool, that has been a pretty big impact. Like, um, it's like the percentage of improvement is like something we never like guessed would have happened. So we are trying to see if there are other platforms we should consider and then do that migration. um, Better testing framework, like in making investment on having the latest and greatest. Like if you want high velocity from the product side and then high reliability from like Slack being the product, we have to invest heavily on testing. Again, making it stable, making it performant, having it in the latest version of it. And the last one I would say is also on like, remote dev environment for
Hmm.
developers to use it. Like, um, there's a lot of things we can experiment remotely versus the constraints we have on a local machine.
Okay. Thank you, Sridhar, for all of that knowledge. And I know we are over time, but I'm going to try to cover some rapid fire questions. I think we
Okay.
can probably skip some of the LLM ones since we already covered some of that. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So, what area are you most excited about it for the DevEx in the coming years?
AI. It is going to improve experience and velocity by like 10x.
Amazing. What makes a good DevEx engineer?
Empathy. They got to think in terms of like frictions and trade off. Of course, technical expertise, but more than anything else, it's empathy.
Okay. And what's your favorite tools for DevEx?
Tools that work.
Do you have any specific one?
uh, it's really hard to mention one tool. Um,
Maybe Slack.
Sure, there's a lot of bots we have. So, yes.
Okay, are there any books like maybe related to DevEx or general otherwise related to work or business that you recommend?
um, I recently read a book called The Friction Project.
Hmm.
The title is The Friction Project: How Smart Leaders Make the Right Things Easier and Wrong Things Harder. I think it's a must have book for anyone who is on developer experience space.
Interesting. That's
Like,
a new one. I have not heard of this one. I'll check it out. I'll also link some of these things in our show notes. I think there was also like your AST blog. I've also read that one, so I'll link that as well. And maybe this book and anything else you want to share, we can put that there. All right, Sridhar, this was a blast. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you again so much for being the sounding board and sharing so much about DevEx. Yeah, really enjoyed this.
thanks a lot for the opportunity, and yeah, really great questions. I got some ideas right now. I got to write it down in terms of like things to do.
Awesome. All right, Sridhar, have a good one.
Yeah. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.